In the misty valleys of feudal Japan, beneath the shadow of snow-capped mountains and the silence of ancient bamboo forests, lived a warrior unlike any the world had ever known. He was not merely a soldier, he was a servant, he was a scholar, he was a sword, he was samurai. For centuries, the samurai ruled Japan not as kings, but as loyal vassals. Their world was built on honor, discipline, and silence. But who were they, really? How did they live when the wars were over and the swords were sheathed? This is the story of their daily life, from sunrise to sunset, from boyhood to battlefield. Welcome to the daily life of samurai, the origins of the samurai. To understand the daily life of a samurai, we must begin with their birth, not just as individuals, but as a class. The samurai did not always exist. They were forged from necessity, through the fires of war and the slow collapse of central power. The Heian period rise from the shadows in the 8th and 9th centuries. During the Heian period, Japan was ruled by an imperial court obsessed with art, poetry, and ceremonial life. But beyond the capital of Kyoto, the countryside was wild and untamed. Bandits roamed free, clans fought over rice fields, and the emperor's authority grew weaker. The imperial court began to rely on provincial warriors to maintain order. Landowners who could raise small bands of fighting men. These warriors weren't yet samurai, they were just skilled fighters. But over time, they developed a reputation, fearless in battle, loyal to their lord, and deadly with the bow and sword. Source: Japan Society, Heian period, and the rise of warrior culture. By the 10th century, these warriors were being called saburao, a verb meaning to serve, and that verb gave birth to a noun, samurai. The Genpei War. Warriors become lords. In the late 12th century, a civil war erupted between two of Japan's most powerful clans, the Taira and the Minamoto. This conflict, known as the Genpei War, ended with the triumph of the Minamoto and the creation of Japan's first military government, or shogunate. Source: Samurai Archives. The Genpei War, Minamoto no Yoritomo became shogun, and the samurai were no longer just fighters, they were rulers. From this moment forward, Japan would be governed not by poets or priests, but by the sword, bushido, the code of the warrior. With power came responsibility and fear. How does a society of killers stay civilized? The answer was bushido. The way of the warrior. Bushido wasn't written in stone. It evolved slowly over centuries, but by the 13th century, it carried certain truths: loyalty to one's lord, mastery of martial arts, willingness to die with honor, self-discipline. Above all else, the samurai were not allowed to chase luxury. They were not supposed to seek wealth. They were expected to live simply, train constantly, and die bravely. Source: Britannica Bushido, the Samurai Code. This was not just a life of battle, it was a life of duty, down to the smallest detail. Birth into the warrior class. Samurai status was hereditary. A boy born to a samurai family was destined to train in martial arts, learn to write poetry, and die with dignity. From the moment he could walk, his life was shaped by expectations, rigid, some poetic. The sword he would one day carry was not just a weapon, it was his soul. Source: Tafugu. What it meant to be samurai. The samurai's childhood training, discipline, and early education. Long before a samurai earned the right to wear his swords, he was shaped by fire of war, but the quiet, controlled flame of discipline. Samurai boys were not raised to play, they were raised to serve. The birth of a future warrior, a child born into a samurai family in feudal Japan, entered a world of strict customs. From the moment of birth, his life was charted. When a boy reached age 3, his hair would be allowed to grow longer. At age 5, he would receive his first formal hakama robe. At age 7, he would be presented at a shrine, symbolizing his entrance into samurai society. Source: Encyclopedia of Japan. Childhood in samurai households. These rites weren't simply tradition, they were spiritual steps toward discipline and honor. Education begins with the brushbi. For a samurai ever held a sword, he held a brush. Literacy was essential. Samurai boys were taught to read classical Chinese texts, study poetry, philosophy, and Confucian ethics. Learning calligraphy was not just for beauty, it taught control, focus, and balance. By age 10, many could write elegant verse. A good samurai was expected to be as skilled with ink as with steel. Source: Smithsonian Education. Learning in feudal Japan. Martial training. The art of pain discipline extended to the body. Samurai boys began martial arts training as early as age 7. They practiced gujitsu archery, kinjitsu swordsmanship, and jujitsu grappling. But more than skill, they were taught to endure pain without flinching, sparring in wooden armor, running long distances barefoot, or kneeling in freezing rivers. These weren't punishments, they were preparation. Source: Tafugu. How samurai trained their children to win in battle. A samurai had to first defeat himself. Silence, stillness, and ceremony. Samurai childhood also involved spiritual formation. Boys learned Zen, meditation, sitting motionless for hours to clear the mind. They learned to drink tea, not for pleasure, but to master poise and etiquette. The famous tea ceremony, known as chanowyu, was more than a ritual. It taught focus, precision, humility, everything required of a warrior off the battlefield. Source: Japan Society, Zen and the Art of Samurai Culture. A boy who could remain still while boiling water steamed before him was one who could remain calm while enemies closed in. Submission to the father. A samurai child obeyed without question. The father was the head of the house, the sword of the family, and the boy's first lord. Disobedience was not punished with shouting. It was met with silence and shame. Everything was intentional. How one walked, how one knelt, how one listened. Source: The Samurai Sourcebook. Stephen Turnbull. A bow too shallow could insult a lord. A glance held too long could provoke a duel. Boys were taught to watch their elders like hawksand, copy them like shadows. A household of fire and shadow. Within the samurai home, a strange duality existed. There was love but rarely softness. A child might never hear, "I love you." Instead, he might hear, "Endure." And that word meant more than anything. He was not raised for happiness. He was raised for duty. A day in the life, dawn to dusk, in a samurai's daily routine. The sun has not yet risen, and the world lies in silence. In a small wooden house with sliding paper doors and tatami floors, a samurai stirs from sleep. He is not a king. He is not rich, but he is powerful in body, in mind, and in loyalty. Let us walk beside him. Let us live one day in the life of a samurai. Dawn. The ritual of rising the day begins early before the first light. The samurai wakes not to an alarm, but to the rhythm of nature. His first act is not to stretch or yawn, but to kneel. Quietly, he bows in respect to his ancestors, then performs his daily ablutions, washing his face, hands, and mouth, spiritual cleansing. He then dons his kimono, layers his garments with care, and fastens the katana and wakizashi's long and short swords sin to his belt. This is not for battle. This is tradition. Even at home, the samurai does not part with his soul. Source: Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai Morning Meal. Simplicity with purpose. Breakfast is modest. A bowl of rice, a bit of pickled radish, perhaps a miso soup, or grilled fish if the household is wealthy. He eats in silence, often alone, with an awareness of every bite. To eat too much is to dull the sword of the spirit. Old samurai proverb: samurai eats not for pleasure, but for strength. Mid-morning martial training with the sun now rising above the rooftops. Training begins. He may start with kenjutsu, the art of swordsmanship, drawing, striking, blocking, sheathing. Every motion is practiced until instinct replaces thought. Next, kagutsu, the bow. From horseback or standing still, the samurai draws his long bow with perfect stillness, releases with breath control, and watches as the arrow flies straight and true. He may also train in iajutsu, quick-draw sword technique, sojutsu spear, combat, and jujitsu, grappling and throws. Training is not optional, it is daily, often hours, long even in peace. Source: Samurai Archives, warrior training traditions, late morning meditation and study after physical training. The body rests, but the mind sharpens. The samurai retreats to a quiet room or shaded garden to meditate. Zazen sitting meditation is performed to discipline the spirit. The goal is not relaxation, but total presence and control. Afterward, he may study texts on Confucian ethics, Zen Buddhism, strategy, or classical poetry. A refined warrior is expected to quote literature as easily as he commands. Troops. Source: Japan Foundation, The Warrior and the Monk. Intellectual life of samurai. Midday service to the Lord Daimyo. If the samurai serves under a daimyo, a feudal lord, he may be summoned to court duties. Attend meetings. Escort the lord, oversee disputes, patrol the landsguard, the estativan in peace. The samurai's presence is a living reminder of order. Loyalty to one's lord is sacred above family, above comfort, above life itself. Source: Britannica, Feudal Japan. Structure of samurai loyalty: afternoon tea, letters, and discipline. In the afternoon, the samurai may take tea. But this is no casual moment. A true samurai understands the way of Tichanoyu as a spiritual training. Every movement is precise. Every gesture is intentional. A ceremony of humility and calm. Later, he may write letters, tend to armor or weapons, or train junior warriors. Everything is done deliberately, never rushed, never lazy. To live with care is to die without regret. Evening, family, reflection, and resties. The sun sets. The samurai may spend time with his family. He teaches his children, listens to his wife, or reads aloud. But even here, restraint is present. The home is not loud. It is not casual. It is ordered. Before bed, he bows once more to the ancestors. He reflects on the day, his strengths, his failures, and what must be corrected tomorrow. Then, with his swords beside him, he lies down, not in fear, but in readiness. Narration softens. He does not know what tomorrow will bring, but he knows he is ready. He is a samurai, and the sun will rise again. The samurai and the sword katana, soul and symbol too, the samurai. The sword was more than a weapon. It was his soul, his identity, his line between life and death. No object in all of feudal Japan carried more reverence or more responsibility than the katana. The katana, a sacred, blade-long, curved, and razor-sharp. The katana is one of the most iconic swords in world history. But to the samurai, it was never just metal. It was spiritual. A well-made katana took months to craft, sometimes longer. Forged by master smiths using folded steel, each blade was made to be strong yet flexible, sharp yet balanced. Every inch mattered. Source: The Craft of the Japanese Sword. Yoshindo Yoshihara, the smith, purified himself before forging. The process included rituals, prayers, and precise steps handed down for generations. It was not just a job. It was a sacred art, sword and spirit. The symbolism of stelva, katana, represented discipline, control, and death without hesitation. The curve allowed for fast, fluid strikes. The two-handed grip gave it power. But it wasn't just about function. It was about form. The way a samurai wore his sword up, tucked into his sash, was deliberate. The way he drew it fast, smooth, quiet, was practiced thousands of times. The sword is the soul. Study it well. Ancient samurai saying to lose one's sword was to lose one's honor. To misuse it was to disgrace one's ancestors. To master it was to become complete. Source: Smithsonian Magazine. The soul of the samurai blade, daily sword care, a ritual of respect every day. The samurai tended to his blade. He carefully wiped off moisture, polished the edge, and checked for flaws. The sword was stored in a lacquered sheath, sometimes placed in a family altar when not in use. Oil was applied to prevent rust. A soft cloth was used to clean the blade. No one else, not even family, was allowed to touch it without permission. Even in peace, the blade must be ready. A dull katana is a dead soul. Source: Tofugu. How samurai maintained their swords. The daishu, twin blades of status. Most samurai carried not just one, but two swords. The katana longsword, around 70. 900, the wakizashi short sword, around 30 to 60 centimeters together. They were called the daishu, meaning big little. This was the badge of the samurai class. Only samurai were legally allowed to wear both. The wakizashi served as a backup in combat or for ritual suicide, seppuku, if honor was lost. Source: Britannica Daishu, the twin blades of samurai swordsmanship, as philosophy to the samurai. Swordsmanship was not just a fighting skill. It was a path to truth. Schools like Itoriere, Katori Shintoraier, and later Miyamoto Musashi's Hyuho Nitten Ichiraier taught not just how to strike, but how to see to predict movement, to calm the soul, to live and die in a single breath. Source: The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. Samurai practiced kata formal patterns of movement again and again, not for battle, but for mastery. A samurai who had mastered his sword was one who had mastered himself. Life, death, and the blade, the sword, was the final judge. If a samurai failed in duty, insulted his lord, or brought shame to his name, he would be expected to commit seppuku ritual suicide by drawing the short blade across his belly. This was not considered a disgrace. It was the ultimate act of honor. to die by the sword one's own sword, was to leave the world as a true samurai source. Japan Times. Seppuku, death and dignity in the samurai code narration softens. In the end, the sword was not just for killing, it was for living correctly, to walk the earth with dignity, humility, and readiness. And, for the samurai, that blade never truly left his side even in death. Honor and the code of bushido. If one element defined the samurai beyond their sword, it was their unyielding code of honor. Bushido, the way of the warrior. Bushido was not merely a list of rules. It was a spiritual code, a way of life shaped by centuries of Japanese philosophy, Buddhism, Shinto, and Confucian ideals. Its origins can be traced to the Kamakura and Muromachi periods, but it found a more structured form during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868. The core values of Bushido. There are 7 virtues most commonly associated with Bushido. Every samurai was expected to embody them fully. G.I.E. rectitude, or justice, to do the right thing. Even if it meant sacrificing one's own life, a samurai's sense of justice was absolute, not based on opinion, but on duty and principle. Yon, courage, not reckless bravery, but intelligent and reasoned fearlessness. Samurai were expected to act even in the face of overwhelming danger. Ren, benevolence or compassion. While samurai were warriors, they were also protectors of the weak. Acts of kindness, generosity, and mercy were seen as signs of true strength. Li, respect and courtesy. A samurai showed respect to superiors and subordinates alike. Politeness was in a weakness. It was a symbol of confidence and refinement. Makoto, chon, honesty and sincerity. One's word was sacred. To lie was dishonorable, and to break a promise was shameful. The samurai staked his life on his truth. Mingyu, honor. Honor was everything. Losing one's honor meant a fate worse than death. It guided all decisions and actions, whether on the battlefield or in daily life. Joni, loyalty. Absolute loyalty to one's lord daimyo or family was paramount. Disloyalty could destroy a samurai's reputation and soul. The weight of honor for the samurai. Honor was not negotiable. If dishonor befell them, whether from failure, shame, or defeat, they were expected to atone in a dramatic way. Seppuku, ritual suicide. This was not considered suicide in the modern tragic sense, but an act of purification. Through seppuku, a samurai could reclaim his honor, cleanse his name, and show ultimate loyalty. It was done with ritual precision, often accompanied by poetry, a final meal, and a second kishakunin to complete the act swiftly. The inner warrior Bushido also emphasized spiritual clarity. A samurai wasn't just a killer, he was a thinker, a strategist. Zen Buddhism helped many samurai calm their minds, accept death, and find peace in the moment. They trained not only their bodies, but their minds and spirits, often meditating for hours before battle. By doing so, they hoped to achieve a state of no mind, where they could act with pure instinct and grace. Legacy of Bushido. The samurai class officially dissolved in the late 1800s. The spirit of Bushido did not die. It continues to influence modern martial arts, such as judo and kendo. Japanese business culture, emphasizing loyalty, discipline, and honor pop culture icons, from anime heroes to films like The Last Samurai and Seven Samurai 2. Understand the samurai is to understand a code, a path that demanded discipline, self-sacrifice, and unbreakable values, even when the world around them changed. War and the samurai weapons, armor, and battlefield tactics. Introduction. When we think of samurai, we imagine warriors dressed in ornate armor, swords gleaming, riding into battle under the banner of their lord. While the samurai's life included poetry, philosophy, and ritual, it was on the battlefield that they proved their worth. In this section, we will explore the tools, strategies, and styles of warfare that defined samurai combat, both in myth and reality. Weapons of the samurai. The most iconic weapon of the samurai is undoubtedly the katana, but their arsenal was far more diverse. Each weapon served a unique purpose, depending on the situation. 1. Katana dull, the soul of the samurai. A curved, single-edged sword with an elegant yet deadly design, forged through a labor-intensive process, using folded steel to create a balance of strength and flexibility. Used primarily for close combat, the katana was often paired with a shorter sword, the wakizashi, forming the daishu, a symbol of status. 2. Yari, tsian, the spy ray. Primary battlefield weapon, effective in formation and 101 combat, could be several meters long, giving reach and control. 3. Naginata, T-doubt, a pole weapon with a curved blade, favored especially by female warriors of the samurai class. Onabugeisha, balanced reach, sweep, and slashing power. 4. Yumi gon, the long bow essential before firearms, asymmetrical, designed to allow shooting from horseback. Samurai were originally mounted archers. Swordsmanship came later. 5. Tanagashima Jonzada, the matchlock arquebusant reduced by the Portuguese in the 16th century, quickly adopted by Japanese clans, changed warfare forever, despite initial reluctance from the traditionalist samurai. Samurai armor, yoroi. A samurai's armor was more than protection. It was an expression of personality, family, lineage, and class. Components of the armor: kabuto, helmet, ornate with crests or horns to intimidate enemies. Some even included facial masks, menpo, with fierce expressions. Cuirass, chest armor made from iron or leather scales, bound by silk cords. Coat armored sleeves, suniate shin guards, and haidate thigh guards provided protection while maintaining mobility. Sashamono, baitsi, small banners worn on the back, identifying the samurai's clan in the chaos of battle. Lightweight, flexible, and visually striking, samurai armor was functional yet designed for fear and prestige. Tactics and strategy. The samurai were not only brave fighters, but also skilled tacticians. Battles were not random charges. They were organized, strategic, and deeply hierarchical. 1. Archery on horseback, yabasami, one of the oldest and most respected skills, practiced during ceremonies and actual battles, required extreme precision and calmness. 2. Individual duels before large battles. Elite warriors would often call out a challenger from the opposing side. These duels were matters of honor, with both sides watching. Names and deeds were recorded for legacy. 3. Formations and sieges. Samurai fought in coordinated groups, using scouts, flankers, and foot soldiers. Ashigaru. Siege warfare became increasingly common during the Sengoku period. including castle assaults and long-term blockades. 4. Psychological warfare banners. Drums, masks, and shouting were used to intimidate the enemy. Names of heroic deeds were shouted across the battlefield to boost morale. Life on the battlefield, samurai warriors traveled with their retainers and assistants. Camps were organized by class, with lords commanding from central pavilions. Before a battle, samurai might compose death poems, meditate, or perform rituals, prepared to die with dignity. Victory brought honor. Defeat, if dishonorable, often led to seppuku, and sometimes even victors took their own lives to fulfill duty or protest a shameful situation. Training for war from childhood. Samurai trained endlessly. Martial arts like kenjutsu, swordsmanship, kujitsu archery, sojitsu spears, and jujitsu grappling. Riding, swimming in armor, climbing, and tactics were drilled daily. Mental discipline was cultivated through calligraphy, literature, and philosophy. The result, a warrior who was not just deadly, but cultured, composed, and deeply rooted in purpose. The family and domestic life of a samurai. While many envision the samurai as stoic warriors forever, on horseback or training with swords, their lives outside the battlefield were surprisingly structured, peaceful, and full of familial responsibility. Family life formed the core of a samurai's identity and reputation. In this chapter, we step beyond the armor and into the home. The samurai household. A samurai household was an institution of its own. The home was often a modest yet well-constructed wooden building, surrounded by a small garden and separated from the outside by paper sliding doors, fusuma, and straw mat floors. Tatami. The environment inside was orderly, quiet, and governed by a deep sense of hierarchy and tradition. Samurai families lived according to Confucian values, which emphasized duty, loyalty, and proper conduct between family members. The patriarch, usually the head samurai, was not only the breadwinner and protector, but also the moral guide and educator of the household. He was responsible for transmitting values, honor, and discipline to the next generation. The role of women. While samurai men were expected to master the art of war, samurai women had their own set of duties that went beyond just managing the household. Women in samurai families were raised with a strong sense of loyalty and resilience. From a young age, daughters of samurai were taught to read and write, manage household finances, and even wield a weapon, usually the naginata, a polearm with a curved blade. This was not for combat in war, but for protection in times of emergency. Stories abound of women defending their homes from bandits and enemy. Soldiers during wartime. The wife of a samurai played a central role in preserving the family's reputation. Her fidelity, humility, and diligence were all reflections of the household's honor. If a woman was unfaithful or failed in her duties, it brought disgrace not just upon herself, but upon the entire family lineage, children, and education. In samurai families were raised with a strict code of behavior. From age 5 or 6, boys began their early training in martial arts, etiquette, and ethics. Their day might start before sunrise with physical drills and end with reading. Classic literature, such as the Analects of Confucius or the Tale of the Hike, fathers closely supervised their sons' growth not just in swordsmanship, but in values like respect, endurance, and obedience. A boy had to be strong, but more importantly, he had to be right-minded. Girls, too, were given a solid education, often more than women in other social classes of the time. Though they were expected to marry and support a samurai husband, they were also prepared to lead a household with wisdom and courage. Some would go on to become educators or guardians of family traditions, daily life and rituals, despite the constant shadow of war and feudal politics. Daily life in a samurai household followed a predictable rhythm. Morning rituals included bathing, meditation, and silent breakfast, often rice, pickled vegetables, and miso soup. Midday might include physical training for boys, sewing, or bookkeeping. For women and household maintenance, evenings were typically quiet, spent around lanterns, with lessons, family discussions, or poetry recitations. Storytelling was a favorite pastime. Seasonal festivals were celebrated modestly, but always with an emphasis on gratitude, discipline, and community. Discipline extended even into leisure. A samurai was not expected to indulge excessively. Every activity, even moments of rest, was approached with mindfulness and purpose. Elders and legacy. Respect for elders was a cornerstone of samurai life. Grandparents, especially retired warriors or widows of samurai, were given high honor in the household. They served as storytellers, transmitters of clan history and moral examples. The legacy of a samurai was not just in his battlefield victories, but in the family he raised, the honor he preserved, and the descendants he inspired. Even after death, samurai were remembered and venerated through household shrines and annual ancestral rites. Oben Festival, balance between war and peace. This part of the samurai life, the quiet, meditative, structured domestic world, is what made them truly balanced individuals. The family was a grounding force, reminding samurai that even warriors needed roots, warmth, and love. Bushido was not just about how one fought, but also how one lived, how one served, and how one nurtured future generations. Samurai and the arts, poetry, calligraphy, and philosophy, though the samurai are best remembered for their skill in war. Their true strength lay not just in the sword, but in the soul. Many were also scholars, artists, and poets steeped in refined culture, introspective thought, and timeless philosophy. To understand a samurai fully, one must understand the delicate balance they upheld between the sharp steel of the katana and the flowing ink of a calligraphy brush. The pen and the sword. There is an old Japanese saying, Banbu Ryodo, Wenwu Laun Dal, the way of both the pen and the sword. This concept was central to the education and identity of the samurai. True mastery came not only from martial excellence, but also from cultivation of the mind and spirit. Samurai were often expected to be well-versed in literature, poetry, calligraphy, and Zen philosophy. In fact, artistic pursuits were seen as essential for calming the mind, sharpening focus, and nurturing compassion, qualities just as critical to a warrior as strength or bravery. Poetry, the soul in 17 syllables, haiku, and waka poetry were especially favored among samurai. These short poems, often inspired by nature, the seasons, or fleeting emotions, became a canvas for expressing inner thoughts, too complex or personal for speech. A famous samurai death poem might read, Under the cherry tree a silent warrior waits. Long petals fall like snow. Poetry was also written before going into battle, during times of peace, and even as final reflections before death. These verses were not simply hobbies, they were a way to embrace impermanence, to reflect on life's beauty and brevity. Calligraphy, discipline in every stroke. Calligraphy Bushido was another respected art form. Practicing it required immense discipline, concentration, and grace. Much like swordsmanship, a single stroke had to be deliberate, controlled, and elegant. Samurai used brush and ink not just to copy Buddhist texts or compose letters, but to practice spiritual self-mastery. The brush became an extension of the self-fluid, yet strong Bani samurai proudly displayed their calligraphy as part of their legacy. Their handwriting revealed not only their skill, but their inner state of being. Zen Buddhism and meditation. No philosophy shaped the samurai spirit more than Zen Buddhism, with its focus on silence, stillness, and mindfulness. Zen taught samurai how to remain calm in the face of death and how to act without hesitation. Meditation was part of daily life, helping the samurai control fear and ego. Zen koans riddles challenged their logic and pushed them into deeper awareness. Enlightenment wasn't something distant. It was to be found in the simplicity of the present moment. Many samurai built relationships with Zen monks, studied under them, and even supported temple construction. These temples weren't just spiritual retreats, they were also places to learn art, ethics, and mental clarity. Tea ceremony and aesthetic simplicity. One of the most graceful practices adopted by the samurai was the Japanese tea ceremony, chanawu. Introduced from Zen tradition, it emphasized harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Preparing and serving tea became a deeply meditative active gesture. Every silence held meaning. Even the architecture and tools used simple, rustic, imperfect reflected wabi-sabi, the Japanese aesthetic of finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. This taught the samurai to embrace humility and let go of worldly desire. Other artistic pursuits beyond poetry and calligraphy. Many samurai also studied ink painting, sumi, monochrome landscapes, symbolizing inner mood, no theater. A highly stylized form of drama, rich in emotion and masks. Kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, symbolizing resilience and transformation. Sword mounting and craftsmanship, creating not just weapons, but objects of breathtaking beauty. Their artistic lives were not a contradiction of their warrior path, but a perfect complement to it. The art of balancing the end. The samurai were not just warriors of war but warriors of wisdom. They studied life and death with equal reverence. They saw art not as a luxury, but as a spiritual discipline. It was in the rhythm of the brush, the silence before a poem, and the patience of pouring tea that a samurai found peace and purpose, the code of bushido and the pursuit of honor in. Every samurai's heart burned a fire that no blade could kindle nor extinguish. Honor. While the West often imagines the samurai as mere warriors in armor, their true guide was invisible in ancient code passed down through silence and steel. It was called bushido, wushido, the way of the warrior. But what did this code mean, and how did it shape the lives, minds, and deaths of Japan's most legendary class? What is bushido? Bushido was not a law written in scrolls, nor a doctrine handed down from a single master. It was a living, code-absorbed through stories, discipline, and lived example, rooted in Zen Buddhism, detachment from fear and ego. Shintoism, reverence for nature, ancestors, and ritual. Confucianism, loyalty, hierarchy, and proper conduct. Bushido evolved over centuries into a moral and philosophical framework that emphasized honor, Mingyu, Meiyo, loyalty, Joni, Chigi, courage, Yonyu, righteousness, Gi, respect, Lirei, right, sincerity, Chung, Makoto, self-control, Zijur, Jezie. These were not just ideals. For the samurai, they were obligations more binding than life itself. Honor before life to a samurai. Reputation was everything. Losing one's honor through cowardice, betrayal, or failure was considered worse than death. In fact, the preferred way to preserve honor after shame was through seppuku ritual suicide, a solemn and brutal act of responsibility. One famous case is that of the 47 Ronin in 1703, after their lord was unjustly forced to commit seppuku. These loyal retainers waited, plotted, and avenged him, then surrendered themselves to death, upholding bushido even in vengeance. Their story became a national symbol of loyalty, duty, and honorable death. Loyalty to one's lord. Samurai's loyalty to his daimyo, lord or shogun, was absolute. Disobedience, even for a noble reason, was seen as a failure of duty. This feudal structure meant the samurai served the lord protected the domain served the emperor, or shogun. Breaking this chain of for justice was deeply complex and dangerous. Bushido demanded complete devotion, even when orders were cruel or irrational. Yet within that demand lay the samurai's greatness. They gave up their personal will in service of something larger. Death with dignity. Taught that death should never be feared. In fact, one famous saying among samurai was, "The way of the warrior is death." This did not mean that the samurai sought death, but that he accepted it completely. Each day lived as if it were his last. Each action performed as though it would be remembered forever. This mindset gave the samurai calmness under pressure, bravery in battle. Clarity in decision-making. To die well was the final and greatest proof of a samurai's character. The internal battle. What Bushido truly demanded was not physical perfection, but moral clarity. Could you remain honest when no one was watching? Could you endure humiliation without resentment? Could you show compassion even to your enemy? These were the silent battles fought, not on battlefields, but within the soul. The samurai trained as fiercely in ethics and etiquette as they did in warfare. They practiced patience in argument, restraint in anger, and humility in victory. A code carried through generations after the end of the samurai era in the late 19th century. Bushido did not vanish. Its spirit lived on in military codes during modern wars, corporate culture, where loyalty and honor are deeply valued. Martial arts like kendo, judo, and aikido. Japanese literature, cinema, and philosophy. Some scholars argue Bushido was romanticized and reshaped over time. Yet its core message endures, that a meaningful life is one lived with honor, courage, and integrity. Was Bushido always noble? History is complicated. While Bushido upheld many beautiful ideals, it was also used to justify violence, to demand blind obedience, to suppress emotion and individuality. It is important to see Bushido not as perfect, but as a powerful attempt to build a moral compass in a world of constant war. In the end, Bushido was not about victory. It was about how you faced defeat, not about control over others, but over oneself, in the stillness of a tearful farewell, the discipline of a clean blade, or the silence after a bow. Bushido whispered to the samurai, "Live with honor, die with grace. Let your life be a light in the darkness." The twilight of the samurai fall, and legacies the 19th century dawned. The world around Japan began to shift. The samurai, once the backbone of Japan's military and moral structure, stood at the edge of a precipice, caught between centuries of tradition and the winds of modernity blowing in from beyond the shores. The fall begins. The decline of the samurai class did not occur overnight. It was a gradual erosion, accelerated by internal instability and foreign pressure. For centuries, Japan had lived under a feudal system where the samurai were the warrior class, paid in rice stipends from their daimyo lords. But by the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, peace had reigned for over 2 centuries. The sword had become more symbolic than practical. Samurai turned to administrative roles. They became scholars, clerks, and bureaucrats. Many took on side jobs to supplement their diminishing income. Some even opened shops, taught martial arts, or practiced medicine. Their way of life was sustained more by nostalgia than necessity. But Japan could not remain isolated forever. Commodore Perry and the opening of Japan in 1853. American warships under Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Edo Bay, with cannons pointed toward the capital. He demanded the opening of Japan to the west. It was a shock to the system of foreign power, technologically superior and militarily threatening, forced Japan to reckon with its stagnation. The shogunate, long supported by the samurai, began to crumble under internal dissent and external pressure. The arrival of Western ideas, weaponry, and trade exposed the weaknesses of Japan's feudal society. Reform was inevitable. The Meiji Restoration and the end of the samurai in 1868. The Meiji Restoration formally ended the Tokugawa shogunate and restored power to the emperor. But it was more than a change of figurehead, was a radical transformation. The new Meiji government sought to modernize Japan at breakneck speed. This meant dismantling the old social structures. The samurai class, once privileged and revered, was targeted for dissolution. Stipends were abolished, leaving many samurai impoverished. The wearing of swords in public was banned under the Heitere Edict of 1876, striking at the heart of samurai identity. The conscription law of 1873 created a national army, ending the samurai monopoly on warfare. Some samurai resisted. The most famous was Seigo Takamori, who led the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, a last stand of the warrior class. It was romantic, tragic, and feudal. Seigo's death marked the symbolic end of the samurai era. Legacy. What the samurai left behind. Though the samurai disappeared as a class, their spirit remained embedded in Japan's national identity. Bushido, the samurai code of ethics, was reimagined in modern Japan as a foundation for discipline, loyalty, and honor, qualities encouraged in everything from business to sports. Samurai aesthetics, armor, swords, calligraphy became treasured cultural artifacts. Samurai values were even promoted during World War II as part of a nationalistic ethos. In popular culture, the samurai lived on. From Kurosawa's black and white epics to manga, anime, and video games, The image of the noble warrior with a katana and unwavering resolve still captivates global audiences. A closing reflection. The samurai may no longer walk the streets of Kyoto or train in the shadows of ancient castles, but their echoes live on. Their daily life marked by discipline, duty, and introspection left an indelible mark on Japanese culture and the world's imagination. In their rise, we saw how power could be tempered by principle. In their fall, we witnessed how tradition must eventually yield to change. And in their legacy, we remember that even in silence, the sword still whispers.